So if you touch your fingertip thumb and you go all the way across your hand as quickly as you can. Yep. So if I was to do that, that is as quickly as I can go, just because the way my brain sends its signals down to my arms and my legs.
Right, okay.
I always say that I'd rather be disabled than able-bodied. One, because I've never known any difference, but more so that it's opened up more doors than I ever thought kind of possible. So I'd rather live my life as it is now than what it could have been able-bodied, because I've been able to achieve so much more than I probably thought as a kid growing up with cerebral palsy and everything else. Like, to me, it's made me who I am.
So Ben, thanks very much for coming on the podcast today. Ben's one of the world's leading wheelchair athletes, the fastest in Britain, holder of the 5,000 metre world record, 2 times Paralympian, and a holder of several other records as well. How are you today, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. When you put it like that, it's actually quite a spread, eh?
That was a wee rough intro, and we'll get down to the detail later on in the podcast, but always like to go back to the start with the guests and tell me how it all began. So where are you from? How was your childhood? And we'll take the story up until the present day.
Yes, I think my accent kind of gives it away. I'm not Scottish. I wasn't born in Scotland. So I grew up in a small town in Shropshire, which is kind of West Midlands part of England. Just grew up kind of normally, got a little brother and little sister. But when I was born, there was some complications with my birth, and the umbilical cord was wrapped a couple of times around my neck, which caused a lack of oxygen to my brain. So it basically means that part of my brain that deals with coordination, muscle tone, and kind of everything like that is all damaged. So the way I kind of describe it is I've got cerebral palsy, and the way it affects me is, you know when you get cramp? Yeah. So that's kind of how my muscle tone is in my legs all the time. So that's kind of my normal. And when I walk, so I can walk a little bit. Yeah. It's very much up on my tiptoes. Like, same with kids, I say I walk a bit like a T-Rex. So I'm very kind of like up on my tiptoes and things like that. But I've had it since birth, so I've never known any different. So that was kind of how I got my disability. And I guess my childhood was just fairly normal. I was quite lucky that I had parents that just didn't really give a damn about if I had a disability. It was kind of like, we'll make him as independent as...
They're going to love and care for you regardless.
It was never going to be an issue, and if there was things I was struggling with, we were always going to kind of find a way around it. And like I say, I got a little brother and little sister who are both able-bodied, and nobody likes losing to their siblings anything, so they kind of kept us grounded and stuff like that. So that was the kind of the starting aspect to it, and kind of mainstream schools and things like that growing up.
And did daycare fine for you? Did you enjoy your school?
Yeah, I was quite lucky because it was a relatively small town. Yeah. There was only kind of a couple of schools kicking around. Right, okay. So you go into kind of primary school at 5 years old, and you kind of mix in. You know what kids are like, they kind of ask questions to begin with, but your pals regardless. And I always found I was kind of drawn to sport. I'm a really competitive person, so I was competitive with my little brother, whether it was in the garden or anything at home, and the same kind of carried over for sports. So all my pals were playing football at lunchtime. I wanted to get stuck in. I'm not going to sit there and watch just because I can't run, or I'm kind of waddling around, or I had to use my chair. So we just kind of got stuck into things, and my mates had put me in goal because if I had a chance of falling over my own feet and kind of saving a shot, then it's a win-win.
You don't need to dive.
Exactly, it's a win-win. But we just kind of normalised everything. It was never a case of you can't do something or my disability is going to be the hindering factor. Like, I'd run myself in the ground trying to do stuff, and it probably to my detriment kind of the next kind of week or so afterwards. But if I wanted to do something, we just kind of cracked on and kind of found a way around it. And I know that kind of put a strain on the kind of social perspective of it growing up, because I never noticed it, but kind of having spoken to my parents and stuff, my mum would have arguments with people in supermarkets because if I fell over, she'd just carry on doing her shop instead of kind of picking me up and making a big deal out of it, because she's like, well, when he's older, I'm not going to be able to kind of do it. I want him to be able to be independent and all that kind of stuff. I was oblivious to it as a kid.
Tough love, wasn't it?
Tough love, like you would do with anyone.
Yeah, I get that. She obviously was confident that you would be able to get yourself up.
Yeah, and it's all those kind of unseen bits that, looking back now as a kind of 27-year-old, I'm like, it was probably tougher on them than it was on me. I think I always was just kind of like, well, It's just, I've never known any different. We'll just crack on, and if I want to do something, we'll find a way of doing it.
Do you think having that the disability made you extra competitive? Did it give you something to prove that you could still be the best, and you've proven that you are the best at what you do? Was that the fire? Did that fuel your fire?
I think I just always hated losing. It doesn't matter what it is. I could have been playing a board game growing up and I'd want to win. Like, I never enjoyed that kind of feeling of losing. And I'd always, if I wasn't good at something to begin with, I'd keep going and keep going and keep going. There's obviously stuff that my disability was always going to restrict. Like, I was never going to be able to play football. I was never going to be able to play rugby. But that didn't stop me trying it or wanting to try it. And I can remember in high school, I had a really, really amazing PE teacher who I kind of still stay in contact with now. And I always say that he was the reason I got into disability sport, because I always just wanted to get stuck in PE. It was like, if my pals were doing hockey, I'd want to do it. I didn't want to be in my chair. I didn't want any adaptions or anything else. I wanted it to be as normal as possible, which when you get into be a teenager, you always want to try and fit in anyway, let alone when you had a kind of wheelchair on top of it. And he was really good. I can remember we had basketball for a semester, and not a semester, like a cycle.
Yep.
And I was trying to do it on my feet, and I was wrecked. I couldn't keep up. So one day we came to the PE hall, and he'd got basketball chairs in from a local charity. I was like, right, for this next 2 weeks, we're doing wheelchair basketball.
Brilliant.
And put all my able-bodied classmates in the chairs.
That's amazing.
And just that little kind of noticing, like, I never went to him and went, oh, I'm struggling, because I never like to admit it. But he noticed it and was like, right, how can we kind of flip that dynamic?
Yeah, totally.
And it didn't change any of the skills stuff. It didn't change any of the teaching. It was just, instead of being at the back of a class, he'd suddenly put me at the top.
Yeah.
And just that kind of dynamic switch was like, right, I never ever thought about disability sport beforehand, because you saw the Paralympics on TV, but unless you know where to go looking to get into those sports, they're not as easily accessible as like a football club on a Saturday or a rugby club on a Sunday. But that kind of made me switch and go, right, should I start looking at disability sport instead of always trying to keep up with able-bodied people? Yeah. Because actually I'm running rings around my pals, which I'd never been able to do before. So he kind of sparked that kind of interest into...
You credit your PE. It just shows you he obviously thought out of the box, and he thought, let's have the full class kind of almost be in your shoes for the day. And make you not make you the most important factor during that session, during that basketball session, but it's changed your life.
Massively.
Just a thought that he has had to put you at the forefront, and like you say, you were better than all your pals for once at that,
And it was always a case, and we kind of spoke about it at the start of every school year. It was like, he will never tell me that I can't do something. It'll be down to me. And if I want to try something and I fall over and I hurt myself, that's on me. Yeah. He was very much the case, right? If you want to be treated like everyone else, I'm going to treat you like everyone else. If there's something you're struggling with, you need to come to me and tell me. Yeah. And me being a teenager, never wanted to, a competitive teenager, never wanted to come and say I'm struggling, because I always wanted to try and kind of keep up. And it was just, he made that switch on his own back, and kind of just changed my perspective of how I saw myself and how I saw my disability, because up until then it'd always been, to me, not an overtly negative thing, but always something that had been back in my mind going, right, I'm slightly different. And I guess that gets exacerbated when you're a teenager anyway. You start noticing all the little things that make you slightly different from your pals, and when your pals are going out and getting girlfriends and going on nights out, and that's when I started to notice that my disability was making me slightly different to the rest of my friendship group, who were all able-bodied, and for him to notice that and to kind of make me change my perception of what my disability is, instead of thinking of it, or starting to think of it as a negative thing, he kind of flipped it and went, right, this could be a really positive thing, and that just kind of snowballed from there.
He obviously seen the fire in you, though. It wouldn't be everybody who would have done that. He obviously knew you were being held back, but he was giving you a platform to then smash through that. He knew that you could go places. He knew that you had fight. He knew that you probably had the competitive nature and physical strength to to achieve great things, to achieve wonderful things. You needed a platform to do that.
Yeah, I don't even know if it was that. I think it was just, like you say, probably just wanting to get a bit more out of myself and kind of what I'm capable of. I was a teenager who always struggled with weight and with that, so I probably wasn't physically in great nick when it came to sport, but it was something I always had a kind of passion for. So I think when we had that PE lesson, it wasn't a case of, right, I've potentially opened the door to get involved in Paralympic sport. It was a case of, this is another avenue for me to be physically active. It wasn't, there was never a plan to go anywhere with it. It was just, right, here's disability sport, here's that kind of dipping your toe in the water aspect to it. And I think, like I say, you see the Paralympics on TV, and I can remember watching it in Beijing in 2008 on BBC, and wanting to be like these athletes and seeing them. And that was my kind of first exposure to disability sport, was watching it on TV. But then after those 2 weeks, Paralympic sport kind of drifts away into the ether for another 4 years.
Yeah, I get that.
So then you kind of fall back into your norms, and you never really knew where to go looking for it. And it wasn't until I had that PE lesson in 2010.
So what age were you then?
I was probably about 15.
Right, okay.
14, 15. So yeah, that was the kind of spark that kind of reignited that, well, maybe I should go looking down this avenue again. And kind of that's when I stumbled into para swimming.
Yeah.
I'd always enjoyed swimming. I was a bit of a kind of water baby and just kind of messing around in it like a kid. And then I thought, right, I can't run, but swimming, it takes all that kind of weight off my legs, and I can't kick when I swim, but my upper body was fairly strong. Yeah. So I can find a way to do it, and just joined an able-bodied swimming club and just went straight in, because there wasn't disability swimming clubs.
But the mental strength to turn up at a able-bodied swimming club, where obviously you have a very little use of both legs. Some people wouldn't want to go. If some able-bodied people wouldn't want to go to a swimming club because they would be too concerned about not being good enough, not looking good enough. There's you are, you turn up with very little movement in both legs, and you're just like, fuck it, I'm going in there. I'm competing with you guys. I'm not going to be held back.
Yeah, because like I say, it's a small town, so I'd gone through swimming lessons at the same swimming pool. Like they knew, the coaches there saw me kind of go through that kind of swimming lesson process and everything else. And I used to walk a little bit more than I do now, but it was very much kind of on my tiptoes and like I say, things like that. But because I'd just been normalised, and disability to me was normal as a child, and yes, I was the only person I knew with my disability or my kind of form of cerebral palsy, but I never got treated any differently. That jump into going into a mainstream swimming club the disability wasn't the big thing in that. It was a case of, right, I want to be able to be competitive and keep up as an athlete and as a swimmer rather than as a para swimmer. Yeah. And I think that probably helped further down the line as that kind of progressed over the next kind of couple of years, because it had been normalised. It wasn't a case of, oh, we have to think about this because he's disabled, or we have to think of scenario X or scenario Y. It was a case of, right, how do I become a good swimmer or good enough to be at the standard where I'm not holding people back in training fitness wise, rather than it being a disability thing. Yeah. To me, the disability was always there, but it was never the most important factor. It was never the most important factor. Like if I wanted to be a good swimmer, I needed to be physically good enough to be a good swimmer. The disability never came into it. And that's where the coaches were great at that club, because they were just like, right, go, we'll work away. We'll adapt sessions where we need to, but you've got to get this amount of work done to be progressing, and kind of take it from there and just treat it as like they would do any other 14, 15-year-old that kind of came into their club.
Wants to learn how to swim good.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. So the swimming lasted for how long?
A couple of years, and I kind of found out I had a chlorine allergy, which is never a kind of good start for a swimmer. I was doing morning swims before school and afterwards, and I was just coming out with kind of really bloodshot eyes, blocked up noses, and everything else. And originally we thought it was allergies to kind of pet hair and things like that, and slowly we kind of worked out it might actually be the chlorine. And by this point I was swimming at kind of British nationals and regional squads and things like that, so it was a decent enough standard.
Definitely.
But in order to make that next step up, I would have had to step up the training, and that exposure to the chlorine would have kind of become more exaggerated. So it was never ever going to be a long-term option, which
not with a chlorine.
So you kind of then back to square one. I'd found this route into paraswimming. I was swimming at Paranationals. I was swimming for a regional kind of West Midlands paraswimming squad and doing relatively well. I now want to make a Paralympic Games because I'm in that world. Yeah. I now know what parasport is. I know how I can get to a Paralympic Games.
And you had built your body up to be, you were starting, although you were switching disciplines, you were fittest you've ever been, the strongest you've ever been, probably the most competitive you've ever been, and you had that network of people round about you in the team that could help you make that switch.
Not even that. I had really supportive parents who were like, whatever you wanted to do, we can support you to do. And I was kind of back to square one, but I was like, right, I want to get to Paralympic Games. This was 2010 going into 2011. 2011 going into 2010 going into 2011. So I then just started looking around at different kind of come and try events and things like that. And there was one for British Athletics, and it was at Loughborough University. And I got sent an email through about it. And being a teenager who never checked emails for anything else, forgot about it until the week beforehand and went, oh, Mum, by the way, there's this weekend, can we go? Managed to rejig some things on the kind of family calendar, and we went along. And originally I was looking at trying kind of seated throws because I'm like, well, that's probably going to be what I'm strongest at. Yeah. Not really thinking wheelchair racing was ever an option. And then I got there and I saw the chairs, and there was a bank of them in different seating positions and different styles, and I was like, they just look cool.
They're cool.
Yeah, they look cool. And as a teenager, that's what you want to look cool.
In your car.
Exactly.
In your wheelchair.
So I asked, and I was like, can I sack the throwing off because I want to just kind of throw myself into this? And I can remember spending the day just learning the basics of, right, this is how you sit in a chair and this is how you steer it. And I can remember going around an athletics track at Loughborough and looking back, I must have been dreadfully slow, like painfully slow. But to me, it felt really quick. Like I never had that experience of this is what it feels like to run quickly.
Yeah.
But this is what I can imagine the closest thing would be.
To getting somewhere fast, to getting somewhere quickly. Totally.
So I just fell in love with the sport from there. And I was lucky that it was kind of just starting to build up all the London 2012 hype, so that the kind of image of parasport was becoming mainstream. Channel 4 had picked it up. Sainsbury's were doing adverts with it. And there was all this kind of momentum building into London. And I was just kind of catching that wave as a beginner going, right, I really want to do wheelchair racing. And this is a sport that I actually, like, I enjoyed swimming and it was good fun. But I didn't love it like I love racing. And I kind of got into a training group that was probably about an hour away from where I live. So it was a fair commitment for my parents to be like, we'll take him to it. But they were really keen because they could see that I enjoyed it. Not that I was ever going to be any good, but they saw that it was something that it was something I was passionate about.
Yeah, definitely.
And I can remember I had my first race in April 2011. And it was the London Mini Marathon, so it's the last 5K of the marathon route.
Right, okay.
And it was for under 18s. I can remember going, and I was in a chair that was kind of seated. There's two different positions when you're in a race chair. There's seated, so kind of like the chair I'm in now, where your feet are kind of out in front of you, and kneeling, where your kind of feet are pinned up behind you. You're kind of on your knees and your heels are touching your backside. And it's not the most comfortable, but positionally wise and aerodynamic wise, it's better to go quicker. I was in this seated chair, and my dad duct taped my feet to my foot plate to make sure they didn't come off mid-race. And I can remember starting, and it was the longest I'd done in the chair at that time, but it was that kind of competitive buzz, and I didn't finish anywhere. I didn't place anywhere. It wasn't particularly quick, but it was that experience of, right, this is a race, and there's a whole community here of racers up and down the country that some are in the same boat, some are starting out at the same time. There's others who have been doing it for years. There's people that have the potential to go to that London Paralympics in 2012, and that was the kind of bug, and that was the kind of start of that kind of competitive wheelchair racing, and it all kind of stemmed from that one race. And then I became a track racer, started to go through classifications and things like that, and going through those kind of processes to make.
How does that work then? So the T34 is your classification for the level of disability. Is that what that means?
So I kind of describe it like a boxer or a fighter as weight classes. Right. So the classifications in athletics or in parasport are to try and make it a level playing field for everyone, because certain disabilities will be slightly better suited to different sports. Yeah. So the T stands for track. Right. And the 34 is the classification for people with a brain injury or cerebral palsy. Right. So we're all, in essence, having the same functional ability, the same disability to a certain extent, and we're all supposed to make the kind of field equal in terms of their range of ability and their movement and things like that. And there's obviously going to be a spectrum.
Of course it is.
There's people who are going to be more severe on that kind of classification end and at the bottom end of it, and there's going to be people at the top end. But by and large, that's how it works. So the kind of process is you send away your medical notes to be examined by an independent doctor. They'll then take you for what's called a bench test, which is basically where you sit on a kind of physio bed, and they run through different kind of tests with you. So I can do one now with you. So if you touch your finger to your thumb and you go all the way across your hand as quickly as you can. Yeah. So if I was to do that is as quickly as I can go, just because the way my brain sends its signals down to my arms and my legs. Right, okay. And it's a way of them testing how your coordination is, whether there's any kind of time delays. So say a starting gun was to go, what's the delay between the gun going and you moving?
Right.
And then they'll do different physio tests to make sure that your muscle tone and stuff fits within a certain band and everything else. And then they'll see you in a race chair, see you training, and then at the end of it, it's usually tagged onto a competition, and they'll see you competing. So the idea is that a competition, no one's holding back. So it's a real reflection of where everyone is in a race as well as in training. Yeah. So they get the kind of full picture, and then after that, you'll get told whether you're in a certain classification, whether you're classifiable or whether you're not. So that's kind of how I fit in with that T34 class. So I just started that process kind of springtime of 2011. Luckily for me, I'm quite clear cut. Like, I've got cerebral palsy, I use a wheelchair, I'm probably kind of middle to top end of that classification, so I fit quite clearly in that box. So it's pretty straightforward for me. And then just started track racing, and I was lucky enough that I was training with people that were going to the London Games, and I got to know kind of Hannah Cockcroft really, really well. So I went to go and watch her at London, and just seeing 80,000 people in a stadium for someone you know to then go on and win 2 gold medals, you're kind of like, well, this is a big deal. Like, I want this.
I want to be
I want to be able to win medals, and I want to be able to feel this buzz, atmosphere and this buzz, because being in the crowd watching it is amazing. But imagine being
the
on track,
of it.
And being there. So that was kind of like, that was I'm going to get my head down and I'm going to work my backside off to get there. And I was probably training once, maybe twice a week at that point, because I was still trying to fit in GCSEs and
still at school. At this point.
Still at school. Yeah. So I was 16. So all my kind of parasport involvement happened within a kind of 3-year period. It was like PE teacher made a really good decision to kind of open that door up to me. I then tried swimming for 18 months, and then tried wheelchair racing and swimming alongside each other because of the chlorine allergy, and I wanted to try and find something else. And then kind of summer of 2011 going into 2012 was when I was like, right, this is when I want to just focus on racing. This is what I want to do. And then GCSEs and exams kind of all fell in with that. So it was quite a kind of manic period of time, but it was great, and it kind of got me in the right headspace to be like, this is where I want to go with it.
And did you feel at that point in your life, because you were getting to your late teens, and like you touched on before, your friends were all like starting to go out to the pub and meeting girls and whatever else, did you feel that came at the ideal time for you, kind of mentally? Would you have struggled had you not had the focus of your sport?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I think for me, when I started racing, I was probably 16, 17. So although you're going out, you're not necessarily going to pubs and everything else, but there's that social aspect. Yeah. And then I'd started to get kind of gradually quicker from 16 to 17. And in 2014, I just turned 18 and was racing really well and got my first call up to a GB squad to go to the European Championships in Swansea. So I just turned 18, but I'd also made the kind of European champs. Managed to come away from there with a bronze medal that summer. Completely unexpected. It was just kind of, that was going to be my first chance to just get an experience of what a major championships is. It was a home ones because it was in Swansea, so there was a certain level kind of attention with that. And it was just, there's your kind of experience in it, and that was all it was going to be to begin with. It was kind of, it's a nice competition to kind of ease them in, because with Parasport we don't really have junior competitions.
Right, okay.
You get quick enough, you then get selected for senior champs and you kind of get thrown in. So the Europeans is always quite a nice one to get young athletes involved in. But I come away from there with a bronze medal, raced kind of really well for that stage of my career, and I'd look back on it and I'd go, right, I want more of this, because winning a medal was great, it was class, it was a real buzz. But there's always a decision when you're a late teen in elite sport going, right, my social side of my friendship group are going out and doing this, which is probably opposite of what I need to do to be able to compete well and to race well and to train well and do everything else. Or I can throw myself into the sport and become really kind of focused and driven and hopefully successful in that. But it's going to take away from that social side of it. And there's always a balance that you have to find, because at the end of the day, you're going for a dream that you might not even get. You train for a Paralympics and you don't find out probably till 4 weeks before the competition whether you're actually going or not. Okay. So you're putting your life on hold for the chance of a no. Yeah. So I made that decision when I was 18, going, right, I'm going to start throwing myself into this. And I have a really good group of close friends who were all really sporty in their own right. Some played kind of high-level rugby and things like that. So they understood that process of it. And obviously athletics is a slightly less social sport than kind of rugby. Sport, but they understood it. And they understood that, right, we all need to kind of fit in around different scenarios and different times of year and stuff. So it was great that I had that support. But there was obviously times where you look on Facebook or you look on Instagram and you were like, I wish I was there. Yeah. And not just kind of friendship wise, but family wise. Like you'd miss out on family meals and things like that. And I can remember a point, it was 2015. I was lucky enough to go away to Perth for 8 weeks. Training just in a warm weather training camp in January.
Perth in Australia?
Yeah, in Australia. No, not in Scotland. Yeah, definitely warm weather in Australia. But I was there for a decent amount of time, and I'd left, and my granddad was really unwell. He had terminal cancer, and I wasn't too sure kind of what the situation was. I was still, like I say, 18, 19, so you're aware of things being not great, but you're not fully aware of everything. And I was away when he died, on the other side of the world, and it was just one of those kind of moments where you're like, I really want to be where I am in terms of training and being in that environment, but I also really want to be with my family because it's a difficult time, and of course it is. You're 18, 19, you're kind of close. You begun to build that kind of adult relationship with the kind of adult figures in your family. Totally. And my granddad was a kind of big part of that. So I can remember having a conversation with him before I went. I was like, you sure you want me to go? Like, I'm happy to kind of hold off and stay. And he was very much like, no, go train. Get to Rio was a year away. So it was kind of like, you need to go and do this. And then
do I'm proud.
Yeah. And I think that's what made it harder, is because you're in an environment that's so performance driven, sometimes you can forget about what else is going on in the bigger world. And then when something like that happens, it kind of brought me crashing back down to earth quite quickly. So you miss out on a lot of the social side and a lot of the family side, but there's things that people don't always see in terms of missing weddings, missing funerals, and things like that. That they're moments that you're never going to be able to get back. Yeah. Like, you can go on a night out, you can go for a kind of movie day or a bowling day with friends or whatever else, but you're not always going to get to go back to someone's wedding or say a proper goodbye at someone's funeral. But you have to make these decisions at points.
That's it. If you wanted to be the best, and you did, and you've proved that for years, and you reached that. Had you decided at that point that, like, enough's enough, I don't want to not be with my family anymore for these things that come up, you wouldn't be a world record holder. You wouldn't have went to 2 Paralympics.
Yeah,
and it's not meaning that making it was any easier, but hopefully it reinforces the decisions that you made at the time were the right ones.
Yeah, and I think at that point I was still really young, and it was, you've got to try and find a balance between training and the kind of real world aspect of it. And I think as you get older, that balance becomes easier to find because you can put things into perspective a little bit more. But I think when I was that age, I was very much like, I want to make Rio. That would be my first Paralympic Games. It'd be a class trip, like Brazil would be class. And that was my only focus 18 months out, as it should be. But at the same time, there's the whole kind of sacrifice side of it that has to go hand in hand. And it was a balance that, looking back on it now, it was the right decision to go, but it was probably one of the hardest decisions I've had to make, just because there was a kind of a family aspect to it.
You'd lost someone that was obviously an inspiration to you, had supported you. He wasn't just a grandfather, it was a respect, like someone that you really looked up for. It was a close grandparent as well.
And I was lucky that the training group I had there, I had some really kind of close friends on there that kind of supported us through that, but it's different. Yeah, it is different. But yeah, that was the kind of build up to Rio, and I was quite lucky that after the European champs in 2014, I kept getting quicker, and I made the Worlds in 2015 and finished fourth at the World Champs, which was a kind of massive deal to us. I'd never expected that, and that was kind of my moment going, right, I'm here. Like,
so you reached fourth in the world, and you must have been 19?
Yeah, 19.
That's nuts.
So I was finished fourth at the World Championships in the 800 meters, and it was just my kind of moment of going, right, I belong here now. Yeah. Like, this is a world stage, and I'm kind of comfortable. Not comfortable here, because you're never comfortable in any sport, but I feel like I belong.
Yeah.
And then went to Rio, and the Paralympic Games was just on a completely different level to anything I'd experienced, and I was not prepared for it in the slightest. I went into it thinking it's just another race. Like, it's like being at Stoke on a wet Friday night. Like, it's not a massive deal. And I got to the holding camp, and that was all fine. I was training really well. Got into the village, and an Olympic or Paralympic village is like a small city. Yeah. Every country has its own kind of apartment block. The food court is kind of it's huge. Like, from end to end, it's massive, and the whole kind of build up to it was just bigger than I expected. And I had the heats of the 100 meters. So I went for 2 events. I went for the 100 meters and I went for the 800 meters. And I had the heats for the 100. And we go into an area called a call room, which is basically a room probably the size of the studio, where you're sitting eyeballing the 7 other guys that you're going to be racing against.
Tense.
Yeah, and it's under the stadium. And the race before us had a Brazilian in it, and you just heard the crowd go mental for this Brazilian runner the race before us. And I can remember sitting in the call going, shit, I'm not ready for this. Like, this is bigger than a World Champs, this is bigger than a Europeans, this is huge. And I can remember just completely falling to pieces with it. Like, I was in my own head, I didn't race as well as I should have done, and that carried on for the rest of the championships. So I'll always look back on Rio as being a big moment because I made my first Paralympic Games, but also being really disappointed because I didn't perform as well as I should have done. because I was in my own head with that. Like it became such a big deal. It wasn't just another race. It was the biggest thing in the world, and I had to do well. And then the nerves come in, and the anxiety comes in, going, "Oh, do I actually belong here?" After racing really well last year, suddenly like this is different. And
it just made you question your future, basically.
I think that was my first time. I had seen people who'd been to Paralympic Games that always said, "Oh, it's a big deal and it's a big competition. It's different to everything else," and you don't really appreciate it. And I can remember thinking about that moment where I was in the stands in London watching as a fan, going, "I want this experience," and then getting into that experience, being like, did not expect it to be like this. Like, this is
just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You're still young as well. Do you know?
I was still young, but I never really saw myself as young because I felt like I should have been there.
Yeah, you're an accomplished athlete at that
not even
point,
I wasn't like compared to some of the guys in the team. I hadn't done anything. I'd not won anything. Like not won any golds or anything like that. It was a case of like I felt like this was the standard I should have been at. And my performance didn't show that, so there's always going to be a bit of regret looking back at Rio. But
I think after Rio, obviously you used that as a massive learning curve. You reset. I take it you got the head down as far as your training and discipline and getting to where you wanted to be, because 2017 was a big year for you.
Yeah, I seem to go in kind of peaks and troughs, and I'll have like a really, really good year, and then I kind of dip back down and I'll have a really good year again. Like it's never just a level kind of run at it. So 2017 was a big year. We had a home world champs in London, which was the first kind of major athletics championships held in London since 2012. So we knew that the crowds and that kind of atmosphere would be there, and it was a big, big one. And I'd made a couple of changes post Rio in terms of training and kind of equipment and things like that, just to kind of get all that nailed down. And I'd gone out to Switzerland, and there's a race meet in Switzerland. It's usually about 2 weeks long, and you race usually 3 events per race meet, and there's 3 race meets across that 2 weeks. So you're talking 9 or 10 races in the space of 2 weeks. But everyone from around the world goes there. So if you make a final at Switzerland and race well, it's the same people you're racing at a World Champs final or a Paralympics final. So it's a really good gauge of kind of where you're at. And the races are usually really, really quick. I can remember we were doing an 800 metre race, and I still don't know why I did it. I went straight to the front and I just pushed. And I can remember crossing that finish line in 800, and I went 1:39.11, which is 1 quicker than the able-bodied world record. I'd knocked 6 seconds off my 800 metre PB in one race.
It's massive. It's massive for such a short distance.
Yeah,
you know?
That was a European record. I was the 3rd guy to go sub 140 at that time, and it was massive. And I kind of just went, "Where the hell did that come from?" Like,
just the boost you needed after the disappointment from the year.
It was a massive boost. But I still look back at it now and I go, "Where did that come? Like, what happened that I was able to do that?" Because I pushed quickly since, but that's still my PB, and I have no idea. It just clicked. That whole race series clicked. I can remember doing a 1500 meters and like doing an amazing time in the 15.
3:13
flat. Yeah. So I'd found a groove that race meet, and I don't know where it came from. I was just kind of in that kind of flow state, and
I'm just looking at the times there, and you managed to sustain the 800 meters pace for the full 1500.
Yes,
it didn't drop at all. I don't even think it dropped a second.
I don't know. I don't know where it came from.
In that.
Yeah, I look back at it and I have no idea where it came from, and I'm still looking to try and find
the answer so you can do it again.
And then I can remember, so that was the year that I broke the 5K world record. And I hate 5Ks on track. I had 12 and a half laps. 1 is a long way to count. 2 is quite a boring race, especially if you're kind of on your own or with kind of a couple other people. It's not my bag. Like 400 meters is my favorite race because it's quick enough. You can go balls out and you don't have to worry about doing it again. Yeah. Whereas a 5K, you have to race it slightly differently. So my coach at the time said, do the 5K. It's the last race of the meet. If you get halfway through and you don't want to finish it, you can pull off and use it as a training push or a cool down or whatever else. I was all right, that's fine. And there was me and another British guy at the time who we've always been kind of back and forth time-wise and stuff. So we came into it, we were like, well, may as well work together because doing 12 laps on your own is going to be hell. Mm-hmm. So we took a lap each. I can remember I taking the first lap. He took the second and so on and so forth. And my coach at the side was shouting out, right, you're on for world record pace. You're 1 second down, 2 seconds down, 4 seconds down, 8 seconds down. I was like, we're going fairly quick here, but it didn't feel like it was massively quick. Like it was comfortable. And then he slowly started counting back up, going, right, 4 seconds down, 3 seconds. I was like, oh crap, right, we're slowing down here. Yeah. Came to 2 laps to go and I was due to take the front again.
So have you got is this radio?
No. So he was just screaming at the side of the track.
Right, okay.
So you're not allowed anything that communicates with a coach. So it's quite a small meet in Switzerland in terms of there's no like kind of big stands and stuff, so the coaches can stand at the side of the track and shout, and you can usually hear them. But he was shouting this to us, and I was like, right, we world record's gone. Like we're not too stressed about that, but I want to win this race. I don't want to let the other British guy win. So I can remember being 2 laps to go, and I was due to take the front, and I just went, nah, I'm all right. I'm tired. I'm going to sit in, because you can save kind of 30% energy by sitting in behind someone, kind of like cycling.
Right. Okay.
So I sat in. He did his lap, and then the bell lap came. Where I was like, right, I'm going to go at 300 meters to go, and if I go and I die, I die. Kicked at 300 meters to go, sprinted, and kind of won that race. Looked at the clock, and I knocked 20 seconds off the world record. So my coach had been double bluffing us, saying that I was getting slower and slower when it was staying the same.
20 seconds is massive.
It's massive. It's not a race that a lot of people do, and it's not a race that we do often. Yeah. So the world record probably wasn't at the standard of, say, an 800 metres or a kind of 400 metres, but...
Does it still stand?
Yeah, it still stands. Yeah. It's a world record.
And it's 5-6 years old?
Yeah. So it was a moment I was really happy with. But at the back of my mind, I was like, right, I need to do the 800 metres. That's the one that I want, because that's the one that kind of counts at majors. Yeah. But it was a moment that I was like, right, all the changes that I've made post Rio have worked. Yeah. Like something's working. We went to the World Champs in July, and I still struggle to watch this race back, and my partner still struggles to watch this race back. It was an 800 metre race, got out on track, and 800 metre races are World Champs they're different to kind of an open race or a Diamond League and things like that. They're more tactical. People aren't bothered about what times they go for. It's all about kind of who crosses the line first, second, third. So I was sat in a really good place. I was probably 3rd or 4th in the race overall, but kind of sat in a really good position to kind of go. At kind of 400 metres to go, I kicked. I was like, right, I'm going for it. I know I'm in good shape. Let's go. Kicked, hit the front with about 300 metres to go, and I led right up until kind of the last 70 or 80 metres, and I can see the finish line. And I'm out in front, I'm thinking, shit, I'm going to win a World Championships here. Like, this is amazing. And then all of a sudden, 1, 2, 3, 4 guys came off the side of me who'd been sitting behind drafting. Right, okay. And they kicked round us. Yeah. And all of a sudden, that moment of, I'm going to win, oh, fuck, it's gone.
So you had basically just been pacing them?
To a certain extent, yes. But like to me, that was my best way of running that race, is getting myself in a good position and going. So I'd done all I can. Like it was a race that I couldn't have done much more. Yeah. But that feeling of being able to see something that you've wanted since you started the sport, and having that feeling of it going away and it being a home championships and everything else. And my best friend had just won a 10th World Championships the race beforehand, and she was shouting us on in the media zone. I just came off and just broke down. Yeah. Broke down. And that was a real kind of low point. Again, I'd gone from racing really well in May time earlier in the year and feeling like I was in great shape, to coming back down to earth with a massive bang and being like I'd done everything I could, and it still wasn't enough. And it took a lot of soul searching and everything else, and a change. I felt like I needed to move away from the training group that I was in, the living at home and things like that. I needed to mix something up, needed to kind of reset post 2017 because I was like, I can't feel like this again. Like I can lose races. I'm fine with losing if I'm not the best person on the day, but to be that close. It hurt, and it hurt a lot. So I made the decision on the way back up from London. So I got back in my car. My mum drove us back up home. There's probably like a 2.5 hour drive from London to my mum and dad's house. So in that time, I rang Stirling Uni and was like, are there any places left in clearing? Because that was my first choice in uni when I was looking around and going through my levels and stuff. They're like, all right, we can get you a place in clearing. You can offer you this scholarship, this accommodation block, and everything else. I was like, right, let's do it. Let's go. Let's move. I'd already kind of started having conversations with a coach up here and the training group up in Glasgow to be like, if I was to move up to Stirling, would you be up for kind of coaching us and taking us on? And they were all really keen. So it was like, right, 2 weeks notice until the start of term, go.
That was you.
And just go.
What were you studying?
Trained to be an English teacher.
Right, okay.
Yeah, which was completely different. I wanted to kind of do something that wasn't sport related because I feel like even if you do go to be a PE teacher, you're in that kind of environment all the time. And I think because I love any sport so much and I can see the benefits of it, if I'm then trying to teach it to people that aren't as passionate, aren't as engaged, I would have really struggled with that. So I went and tried to train to be an English teacher. Moved up in 2017, moved training groups, moved environments. And it was the best decision I made, not necessarily just for the racing side of it, but the kind of life side of it. It gave me a chance to move out from home and kind of grow up and mature and that side of it, but also get a bit of perspective on kind of where I want the rest of my life to go in terms of I'm not going to be able to race forever.
No,
so what else? Yeah, where else can I go? And I met my girlfriend 2 weeks into moving up here, so it all kind of just fitted in really well. Training with the new group, it took a bit of adjustment, but I made the Europeans in 2018 and got 2 silver medals there. So that was
in Berlin.
So that was my kind of best coloured medal, if you would say that, in 2018. So kind of validated those kind of decisions moving up. I was like, right, I'm in a good place because I moved up. I'm having a backup plan for if an injury happens or if for some reason I fall out of love with racing. And I'm enjoying being up here. I enjoy being in Scotland. To me, it's just an amazing place to be because you're kind of half an hour, 40 minutes away from being in the back arse of nowhere, and you can just...
Especially at Stirling. I mean, it's quite a renowned university as far as their sport and their facilities and stuff go as well. And you're so close to Loch Lomond and the Highlands as well. It's
and I think
such a difference.
It tied it all in really well. And I think I was really lucky that I was able to get supported by the Scottish Institute of Sport. So I was able to come in and all my S&C just switched straight over. My nutritionist switched straight over to that kind of Scottish setup. My training environment, the coach changed, but you're still training. You're training really hard. The kind of structure of your day stays relatively similar. You're just adding in university and the kind of social and kind of benefits that come with being a student and enjoying that part of it. I found I got that balance a lot better moving away from home and having a new environment and being able to go, right, when training's crap and you feel like shit because you've had a bad session, you've still got deadlines to do. Yeah. So you can kind of switch off and do uni work, and you can get that balance between, because Stirling's such a sport uni, you end up having pals that are having the same kind of struggles balancing everything as you are. So then you've suddenly got a social group within your university space that kind of understands it.
Yeah, it's almost like a social group and a support group.
Yeah, you can kind of bounce off each other. So totally. I kind of got that balance right at uni. And then 2019 made the world champs team again, and the standard of wheelchair racing gradually just got harder and harder. So the times that were winning medals in 2017 were suddenly, you're struggling to make finals with it in 2019. So you have to just kind of keep progressing. And I'd made that team, and I was really, really happy with that. Again, I'd made finals, so I'd been consistently making finals or kind of finishing high up just outside the medal places since kind of 2014. So I'm in a good place. I know I'm in a good place, and I've got this whole new dynamic in terms of coaching setup and life. So I was happy with that as a kind of setup, and then COVID hit. And it's a really weird environment to be in when you're trying to explain to someone that you put your life on hold for 4 years, and then for a pandemic to come along and suddenly you can't train in the places you used to train, and then the thing that you'd been holding off for and putting your life on hold for goes, we're going to postpone that by a year.
Your whole purpose is taken away from you.
Yeah, I can remember sitting in my living room and having the TV on, and they're just going, the Olympics and Paralympics have been postponed. I'm like, what do I do? What do I do now? Because we had no idea how long that pandemic was going to go on for. Like, do I still want to train, but like, where am I going to go with it for the next year? Because suddenly you were 6-7 months out to right now I'm a whole 18 months away. What do I do in that 18 months? Like, is it going to be postponed? Is it going to be cancelled? It was a massive kind of mental hurdle just to be like, what's going on?
You stay disciplined and motivated for something that you don't know when it's coming or if it's coming.
Yeah,
you know,
and I think the first thing I did was actually we ordered a takeaway in that night, because I'm like, right, I've got a little bit of bit of breathing room. Like, I need to just be able to reset and be like, right, it's like there's a bigger picture aspect to it with the pandemic, and I completely get that. But when you're in a kind of bubble of everything going towards one event and that event gets pulled, you're kind of just left in a kind of really deflated state and going, right, what's my purpose? Like, that year I had my dissertation to do, so I had dissertation, Tokyo, and my final teaching placement. So it was a lot going on anyway, but everything, my primary focus was Tokyo. It wasn't my dissertation. I felt like I could get done, and the placement was my placement, but everything was about trying to make that Tokyo team, because it was going to be the hardest Paralympic team I'd ever have to make.
Right, okay.
And I knew that because the standard of Paralympic sport in general has gone up.
Rocketed.
So you're not, to make a Paralympic team, you're not just trying to be the best in your class. You've got to be kind of top 5, top 6 in the world to warrant selection, but they've only got so many male and female spaces. So it's not just the guys that you'll be racing against. It's, is there a long jumper that's higher up the world rankings than you are? Is there a sprinter that's higher up the world rankings than you are? Because they can take 3 people per classification. So if there's 3 arm amputee sprinters that are kind of 4, 5, and 6, and you're sitting at 7th in the rankings, all 3 of those are going to go, and suddenly those men's spaces get filled up quite quickly.
Right, okay.
So there's a whole different, you're looking at world rankings for every class, not just yours, to kind of work out where you are. So it's just a massive kind of stressful period. But yeah, COVID happened, and I think the best thing I did in that period was get a dog and get my dog, just because people, I don't want to compare it to having kids, because I don't know what that's like, but people that train and are in sport go that when you come home, it doesn't matter whether you've had a bad day or whether you've had a good day, they're happy to see you.
Yeah, of course.
And that was exactly the same with Reg. So getting him at that time was exactly what I needed to be, just have that little reset and just not, because dissertations and everything else, that's a stressful period for anyone, and the Tokyo stuff on top of it was another layer. I just needed something completely away from everything. If I wanted to rant at him, I could rant, and he still just grins back at us. Yeah. So that was the kind of COVID pandemic for me. It was kind of training as much as I can with no real focus on what we were training for. And I needed him to be able to get me out of the kind of mental place I was in, because it was quite a
dark place.
Yeah, it was all encompassing. I think it was the same for everyone, but for me, I felt like I was really struggling in the pandemic, because you couldn't go out and do anything. And he was able to get me out of that hole, because although I was living with my partner, I talked to her and she's like, it'll be fine, be kind of like, well, you don't know, because you're not going through the same stuff. Yeah. Whereas you can, it sounds stupid, rant and rave at a dog, and he just sits there and smiles and comes and gives you a cuddle. Like,
but it's just something to vent at, as a release for you to get rid of your frustrations, basically. My
partner's great. She's great at supporting my training, cooking the right stuff and helping me eat right, and kind of all that side with training. But you don't want to dump everything on them all the time, because they've also got their own stuff, and she's a primary school teacher, so when she was in the pandemic, she had to try and teach online, and there's a whole layer of her stuff that's going on that I need to be there for.
Dogs are great. I've got two, so I totally know. I totally understand. What you're getting at with that. So Tokyo was postponed.
Yeah.
In the end till 2021.
Yeah, 2021. Used the pandemic as best I could. Got my dissertation done, dusted, and then I decided in the placement of the last year, I kind of chatted with my lecturer and being like, I can't fit everything in. I'm waking up at 4:30, 5 o'clock to train before my placement, and I'm going into school teaching all day, and teaching's a really unforgiving profession anyway. It's not a 9 to 5, it's a 24/7 thing. And then I'm trying to come away and train again. I'm not doing anything to the highest standard because I can't recover enough to be able to function in my training, in my classes, and be the best at anything. So I'm kind of spreading myself too thin. So we decided to knock the final part of the teaching placement on its head and just kind of scrap it, which was a difficult decision because it meant that if you train to be a teacher in Scotland, you graduate and you get a probation year, which is kind of a guaranteed job for a year within a school. So it meant that I wouldn't be able to become a teacher that way. I'd have to go back, and if I wanted to do it, do a PGDE on top. At this point, so 2018, I lost my funding from UK Sport. So I've been self-funded since 2018.
Right, okay.
So just kind of going off a student loan, scholarships from the uni and things like that. But by and large, I'm a self-funded athlete. So my girlfriend sometimes says it's a glorified hobby because you don't get paid for it. So everything I was doing was self-funded. So trips were self-funded and everything else. So it was a big decision because you kind of put on hold a career path that you kind of knew was semi-secure to go for a dream that you may not get selected for. But I was like, right, I need to do it because I can't spread myself this thin. Like I'll just burn out. Managed to get back on track with training and racing and put myself in a really good place, got selected for Tokyo, and it was a really, really strange games. I wish we got to experience it without COVID because I think Japan would have really, really embraced that. And I think because the culture differences, it's so different from any kind of Western competition that we could have had. We were in a holding camp in a hotel in Japan, and half the hotel was cordoned off. So you had your room, went to your room, went down for dinner, had your gym stuff all in that hotel, but that was the only kind of real 3 spaces you got to go to. And you went into the village, and that was a more normal kind of environment because everyone was testing every other day for COVID. So you knew that you can go to the canteen, you can grab a coffee, and you can kind of be a bit more normal. And the racing was the kind of bit that tied it all together. Like I say, Rio didn't go how I wanted. I didn't make finals in Rio, which stung. That was probably the only championships that I've not made a final in. So I went in to Tokyo and being like, right, I want to win a medal. I still want to win a Paralympic medal. That's my goal. But in order to get that, I need to get into a final. So all I wanted to do was get better than what I did in Rio, and to me that was kind of progress. Went into Tokyo, made a final in the 100, which I didn't expect because my 100 meters isn't my strongest event. I'm not the greatest starter in the world. It was all about that kind of 800. Raced in the heat, and it was the scrappiest race that I've ever done. Elbows were kind of going everywhere. And middle distance racing and wheelchair racing is very similar to middle distance racing in able-bodied running, in the sense of if you need to get out of a hole, you've got to try and find the right gap, and people, like, they would clip you in running, hands get caught and tangled and things like that. So I can remember racing a guy from the UAE, and hands and things are getting knocked off rims, and it was just a scrappy race, but I managed to make it through to the final, and that was the kind of pressure off. Like I'd done my first little step there. Like if I get a medal now, I get a medal. Like
but you're in that.
I made a final out. I put myself in the race. And race day came, and it was monsoon rain. Like it was just heavy, thick drops of rain, and with the race chairs, that they're a nightmare to push in the wet because you push on kind of plastic gloves that are covered in rubber.
Yep.
So, and then you're pushing on a push room that's covered in rubber. So rubber on rubber in the wet, you just have no grip. So it was always going to be a bit of a whoever coped with those conditions best would win. I raced and I didn't place as well as I would have liked, but it's just one of those. I got myself into a position to be in a final, and for me that was
the biggest.
That was a big improvement, because you look at what happened in COVID, you look at what happened kind of during the pandemic. I'm in a different place to a lot of other athletes on that team. People are either fully funded or kind of having that financial support from a governing body. I didn't have that. I was trying to balance a lot of different things, and to me that was a success, because I would prove to myself that although the funding's great and it takes the pressure off in terms of you're able to recover, you're able to kind of do all the kind of little things that make a difference, I'm still a good enough athlete to be competitive whilst trying to balance full-time studies or now full-time employment. And just knowing that there's a future past losing your funding. Because to me, from between 2018 and 2021, I knew that once I finished uni, there's going to be a decision to make on whether I'm able to keep competing at the same standard I am, or whether it's going to be a point where I have to choose which path I need to kind of go down. But I think for me, Tokyo was the kind of moment where I went, right, I'm able to be a high standard, elite level athlete, and I'm able to work as long as I can get that right environment that can kind of benefit one and each other.
Right, definitely.
So that was a kind of big bonus that I took off from Tokyo. Just that I'm able to kind of cope with it. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many, like you say, there's so many people there that had their funding. They didn't have a university degree to finish. They didn't have a job to do. They didn't have a house to run, a relationship to run. But there you were competing up there with the best of them, and you had to do all that yourself.
Yeah,
and a lot of other countries' COVID rules maybe weren't as strict as the UK's in terms of training opportunities, etc. as well. So you should be super proud of yourself.
I was, and I can remember chatting to one of the Australian racers, and I was the only non-funded athlete in that final.
Wow, that's amazing.
So everyone else, including the other British guy that was on the team, was on a funded program by their governing body. So I was the only unfunded athlete to be able to make a final in my classification in Tokyo. So yeah, the Aussie guys were all supported, the Canadians were all supported, the UAE, Tunisian, and like I say, the other British guy was also funded, which stung a little bit more. But
so where are you now? Teaching?
No. So I finished my dissertation, and I had a choice to make after Tokyo. Like, do I want to go and do my PGDE, or do I want to try and find a job that realistically is a bit more flexible to be able to train and do stuff like that? So I decided to knock the teaching on its head for the foreseeable, if I'm honest. I think seeing how much hours my girlfriend has to put into being a teacher, I wouldn't be able to give what is needed for that to be able to get the most out of that as a career. So I went and worked for Scottish Disability Sport for a little while as their kind of regional coordinator for Edinburgh East, Mid and West Lothian, working on kind of grassroots disability sport and things like that. And I did that for 18 months. And then I moved into the role I'm in at the moment, which is at Scottish Student Sport, which is looking after how we get more people involved in university sport, able-bodied and disabled, but just having that platform to be able to use my experiences on, right, what were the barriers that I faced on not just getting into disability sport, but what stopped me wanting to try different sports in general, and how can we get that right kind of across the board.
Definitely. I mean, we'll bring the podcast to a conclusion now, but I think the podcast is about resilience, which is courage and strength and bravery and overcoming an obstacle. You didn't let that define you. Your cerebral palsy is actually, is it fair to say that it's played a pretty insignificant part of your life? You've achieved so much more than a lot of able-bodied people could ever.
Yeah, I think, I always say that I'd rather be disabled than able-bodied. One, because I've never known any difference, but more so that it's opened up more doors than I ever thought kind of possible. So I'd rather live my life as it is now than what it could have been able-bodied, because I've been able to achieve so much more than I probably thought as a kind of kid growing up with cerebral palsy and everything else. Like, to me, it's made me who I am.
No, it's truly inspiring. And you inspire both disabled athletes or disabled people and able-bodied people out there. You've certainly inspired me with your story, and I think that it puts if people put things into perspective about how the barriers that they're faced with in life, and they realise the barriers that other people are actually faced with and how monumental they could be, but they've smashed through them. You've achieved the world records, you've appeared at 2 Paralympic Games, and you're now telling your story and inspiring and teaching other people to do the same. So thanks very much for coming on, Ben. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Perfect. Thank you for having me.